Cold open. I'm standing in a barn that smells like dust and decades of forgotten dreams. Four strangers sit across from me at a table made from old plywood and sawhorses. Their faces, I've memorized them from photographs I found 3 days ago. Photographs of a family that fell apart. My hands are shaking as I lift the metal box. It's heavier than it looks. Inside, $8,400 bills in rubber-banded stacks. Money I could have kept. Money that would have saved me. The woman in the black blazer, Claire 46, looks like she hasn't slept in weeks, reaches for the box like it might disappear if she moves too fast. Her fingers brush the bills, and she flinches. This is Dad's. Her voice cracks on the word Dad. This is really his money. I nod. I can't speak yet. My throat is too tight. The big man Davis, her brother, leans forward. He's crying, and he's not trying to hide it. Where did you find this? I point through the barn door toward the field, where a restored John Deere tractor sits gleaming in the afternoon sun. In there, hidden in a compartment under the seat. But that's not everything. I reach into my backpack and pull out the leather journal. The pages are yellow, the binding cracked. I hold it out to Claire. There are 247 letters inside. Your father wrote them over 18 years. One for each of your birthdays. One for every Christmas. He wrote to all four of you. Lorelei, the youngest daughter, makes a sound like she's been punched. He wrote to us. He never sent them. I don't know why, but he wanted you to know. He wanted you to understand. Wes, the youngest at 33, hasn't said anything yet. He's just staring at the journal like it's a bomb that might explode. His jaw is tight. His hands are fists on the table. Claire opens the journal with trembling fingers. The first page. Her father's handwriting, shaky but clear. If you're reading this, I'm probably dead. I want my children to know I love them. I just didn't know how to say it when I was alive. The sound she makes is inhuman. It's grief and relief and rage all tangled together. She presses the journal to her chest and says, I step back. This moment isn't mine. This moment belongs to them. But as I watch these four broken people put themselves back together, I think about the choice I made 3 days ago. The choice that brought us here. The choice that changed everything. Fade to black 72 hours earlier. Freedom is just another word for nothing left to lose. The iron gates of Riverside Reform School closed behind me with a sound like God's fist slamming shut. I didn't look back. Looking back meant remembering 3 years I'd never get back. 3 years stolen by people who called themselves friends. 3 years for a crime I didn't commit. The sun was too bright. After 3 years of fluorescent lights and concrete walls, real sunlight felt like an assault. I squinted against it standing on the sidewalk with a canvas duffel bag in one hand and $72 in the other. $72. That's what 3 years of my life was worth. That's what the state of Oregon gave me for time served, for good behavior, for not fighting back when every cell in my body wanted to scream that I was innocent. I was 23 years old. I looked 30. Prison ages you in ways that don't show up in mirrors. It's in your eyes, in the way you hold your shoulders, in the way you scan every room for exits before you even think about sitting down. My name is Reese Marlowe. This is my story. 3 years earlier, I'd been a different person. I was 20 years old, working 2 jobs, saving money for community college. I wanted to be a veterinary technician. I'd always loved animals. They didn't judge you. They didn't lie. They didn't set you up to take the fall for crimes you didn't commit. But that night, the night that destroyed everything, I walked into a party with people I thought were friends. I didn't know they were setting me up. I didn't know that while I sat in the living room drinking a soda, they were in the back room breaking into a safe. I didn't know the police were already on their way, tipped off by someone who wanted me to take the blame. When the officers burst through that door, I was the only one left. Everyone else had slipped out the back. I stood there confused, surrounded by evidence that had been carefully planted. My fingerprints on things I'd never touched because they'd asked me to hold items earlier. Pass them cups, touch surfaces. They'd planned it all. The trial was a blur. 2 witnesses testified against me. My public defender was overworked and exhausted. The judge looked at me like I was already guilty before anyone spoke a word. And when the verdict came down, I felt the floor drop out from beneath my feet. 3 years. But losing my freedom wasn't the worst part. The worst part was losing Grandma Elodie. She was the only family I had left. My parents died in a car accident when I was 15. Grandma Elodie took me in without hesitation. She was 71 years old, living on a fixed income, barely able to take care of herself. But she made room for me in her tiny house and in her enormous heart. She taught me how to cook her famous apple pie. She taught me how to mend clothes. She taught me that hard work is its own reward and that your character was defined by what you did when nobody was watching. Every night before bed, she'd hold my hands and say, "Do the right thing, Reese girl, even when nobody's watching. Because someone's always watching, even if it's just you." When I was arrested, she was the only one who came to visit me. Every week for the first year, then every other week when her health started failing. She sat on the other side of that glass partition with her hands pressed against it like she could somehow reach through and hold me. "I know you didn't do this," she said, "every single time. I know who you are, Reese, and I'll be here when you get out. We'll start over together." 8 months before my release, the prison chaplain called me into his office. He asked me to sit down before he told me. I knew before he opened his mouth. Grandma Elodie was gone. She'd passed away in her sleep at the care facility, where she'd been moved when she could no longer live alone. I hadn't even known she was in a care facility. She hadn't told me because she didn't want me to worry. She'd protected me even at the end, even when she was the one who needed protection. I applied for compassionate leave to attend her funeral. They denied it, said I was a flight risk. Me, the girl who'd never even gotten a speeding ticket before that night, everything went wrong. I didn't get to say goodbye. I didn't get to tell her I loved her one more time. I didn't get to keep my promise that we'd start over together. The grief was so heavy I thought it would crush me. For weeks I could barely eat, barely sleep, barely function. The only thing that kept me going was anger. Anger at the friends who betrayed me. Anger at the system that failed me. Anger at a world that had taken everything. By the time I walked out of those gates, I had nothing left. The county had sold Grandma Elodie's house to pay her medical debts. Her belongings had been liquidated. The few photographs I had of her, the quilt she'd made me, her recipe cards with handwriting I could recognize anywhere, all of it was gone. I stood outside those prison gates with $72 and a duffel bag containing 2 changes of clothes, a toothbrush, and a heart full of grief that felt like it might consume me from the inside out. I had no home, no job prospects with a record, no references, no family. I was completely alone in the world. That first night of freedom, I stayed at a homeless shelter in Portland. I lay on a thin mattress, staring at a cracked ceiling, listening to the sounds of dozens of other broken people trying to sleep. The air smelled like industrial cleaner and despair. I didn't sleep at all that night. I just kept thinking about Grandma Elodie, about her voice, about the way she'd stroke my hair when I was sad, about all the things I'd never hear her say again. Part of me wanted to give up. Part of me wanted to let the anger and grief swallow me whole. But then I heard her voice in my head clear as a bell. "Reese girl, life is gonna knock you down. That's guaranteed. But what matters is whether you get back up. And you've always been a get back up kind of girl." So I got up. The $100 dream. The next morning I went to the public library. It was the only place I could think of with free computers and no judgment. I spent hours searching for any opportunity that might give me a fresh start. I looked for jobs. Nobody wanted to hire someone with my record. I looked for apartments. Nobody wanted to rent to someone with no income and no references. I was about to give up when I saw it. An online auction for a small farm in rural Washington about 200 miles north. The starting bid was $100. I clicked on the listing, expecting it to be some kind of scam. But it was real. The description said the property was 47 acres in a town called Cedarbrook, population 890. There was a photo of an old farmhouse that looked like it might collapse in a strong wind. A sagging barn, overgrown fields, rusted farm equipment, slowly being reclaimed by nature. The description was brutally honest: property sold as is. Significant repairs needed. No utilities currently connected. Buyer responsible for all back taxes and fees, totaling $850. My heart started beating faster. The current bid was still $100. The auction had been running for 3 days and nobody else had bid. Nobody wanted this place. But I saw something different when I looked at those photos. I didn't see a disaster. I saw possibility. I saw a place far enough away that nobody would know my name or my story. I saw land that could grow things if someone was willing to work hard enough. I saw a chance. I had $72. The bid was $100. I watched that auction for 3 more days, coming to the library the moment it opened and staying until it closed. I couldn't get the farm out of my mind. I dreamed about it at night, about standing in those overgrown fields, about fixing up that old house, about building something from nothing. On the final day of the auction, with just 10 minutes left, the bid was still at $100. I had a choice to make. I could keep my $72 and use it to survive for a few more weeks. I could find some minimum wage job, eventually rent a room in a boarding house, scrape by indefinitely in a life going nowhere. Or I could bet everything on a dream. I typed in my bid. $100. My finger hovered over the confirm button. My heart was hammering so hard I could hear it in my ears. This was insane. This was absolutely insane. I'd never seen this property in person. I didn't know anything about farming. I would have nothing left if I did this. No safety net, no backup plan. I closed my eyes and saw Grandma Elodie's face when she told me we'd start over together. I clicked confirm. The next 60 seconds were the longest of my life. The page refreshed. Congratulations. You are the winning bidder. I had done it. I owned a farm. Then I read the fine print and my heart sank. Back taxes and fees totaled $850. I had to pay them within 30 days or I would lose the property. I had $72. I was already in over my head. 23 days of hell. The next 3 weeks were the hardest of my life, and I'd already survived some very hard things. I worked every job I could find. Day labor at construction sites where men twice my size looked at me with skepticism until they saw how hard I could work. Night shifts unloading trucks at the docks, washing dishes at a diner that paid cash under the table, cleaning offices after midnight. I slept at the shelter when I could get a bed. I ate at soup kitchens. I saved every single penny. The other people at the shelter thought I'd lost my mind. Girl, you buying a farm, you don't know nothing about farming. They were right. I didn't know anything about farming, but I knew about surviving. I knew about refusing to quit. I knew about getting back up when life knocked you down. And I figured that was at least a start. 23 days later, I had $940. It had cost me blisters on my hands and feet. It had cost me sleep and dignity and more sweat than I thought one human body could produce. But I had it. I went to the county office and paid the back taxes. I signed a mountain of paperwork I barely understood. And then a clerk with tired eyes handed me a deed. I owned 47 acres of land in Cedar Brook, Washington. The clerk looked at me with something between pity and curiosity. You know that property's been abandoned for almost 13 years, right? Old man Harold Brennan died back in 2010, and his kids wanted nothing to do with it. It's been sitting empty ever since. I nodded. I knew that was why I could afford it. I took a Greyhound bus north, watching cities give way to suburbs, then to small towns, then to forests and mountains and open spaces I'd only seen in pictures before. The air changed as we drove, becoming cleaner, sharper, carrying the scent of pine trees and possibility. When I finally arrived in Cedar Brook, it was late afternoon. The town was exactly what I'd expected. One stoplight, a general store, a diner with a faded sign, a gas station that looked like it hadn't been updated since 1975. I walked into the diner because I'd skipped lunch and my stomach was growling. The smell of coffee and fried food made my mouth water. A woman behind the counter looked up when the bell over the door chimed. She was in her mid-60s with silver hair pulled back in a practical bun and sharp eyes that seemed to see right through me. Her name tag said Ruby. She watched me slide onto a stool at the counter, taking in my worn clothes, my duffel bag, the exhaustion that must have been written all over my face. "What can I get you, honey?" I ordered the cheapest thing on the menu, a bowl of soup and a piece of bread. While I ate, I asked for directions to the old Brennan place. Ruby's eyebrows rose. "The Brennan farm." "That's where you're headed," I nodded. She gave me a long, measuring look. Then something in her face softened just a fraction. "Girl, you're either very brave or very crazy. Maybe both." She refilled my water glass without being asked. "It's about 5 miles down Ridge Road. Take the second left after the old sawmill, then follow the dirt road until it ends. You can't miss it. It's the only place around here that looks like it's been through a war." She paused, then added, "Harold Brennan was a good man. Loved that land more than just about anything. Shame what happened to it after he passed. Shame his kids didn't want to carry on." I thanked her and paid for my soup. As I was leaving, she called out, "Hey." I turned back. "If you need anything, you come back here. I don't turn away people who are willing to work for what they want, and you look like a worker." I didn't know how to respond to that unexpected kindness. I just nodded and walked out into the late afternoon sun. The first night, I walked those 5 miles as the sun began its descent behind the mountains. The sky turned from blue to gold, then deepened into shades of amber and rose. I'd never seen colors like that before. In the city, buildings and smog blocked out the sky. Here it stretched forever in every direction. With each step, my heart beat a little faster. What was I doing? What had I gotten myself into? I didn't know anything about farms or land or any of this. I was a girl from the city who'd spent 3 years locked up for something she didn't do. What made me think I could turn an abandoned property into anything worth having? But I kept walking because turning back wasn't an option. It never had been. When I finally saw the property, my heart dropped into my stomach. The photos hadn't lied, but they'd been kind. The farmhouse was worse in person. Half the porch had rotted through. Windows were broken or missing entirely. Generations of weather damage had peeled paint and warped boards. Vines crawled up the walls like the land was trying to reclaim what humans had abandoned. The barn was listing to one side at an angle that seemed to defy physics. It looked like it was held up by nothing but stubbornness and prayer. And the fields. The fields I'd imagined growing things, feeding people, building a life. They were a jungle of weeds and blackberry bushes and small trees that had taken root in what had once been cultivated land. Scattered throughout the property, like the bones of some ancient civilization, were pieces of farm equipment, so rusted and overgrown, I could barely identify what they'd once been. I dropped my duffel bag on what remained of the front porch and sat down hard. The boards groaned under my weight. I sat there for a long moment, feeling the weight of every decision that had led me to this place. I was alone. I was broke. I was on a property that would take years to restore. I had no electricity, no running water, and winter was coming in a few months. For the first time since walking out of Riverside, I felt tears burning in my eyes. What was I doing here? Who did I think I was? I wasn't a farmer. I wasn't a carpenter. I was just a girl who'd gotten destroyed by life and was too stubborn to admit defeat. The tears came then, hot and fast, streaming down my face, dripping onto the rotted wood beneath me. I cried for Grandma Elodie, who should have been here with me. I cried for the 3 years I'd lost. I cried for the girl I used to be, the one with dreams about veterinary school and a normal life. I cried until I had nothing left. And then I heard Grandma Elodie's voice in my head again. 10 minutes, Reese girl. You get 10 minutes to feel sorry for yourself. Then you get up and you get to work. I wiped my eyes. I checked my watch. 10 minutes had passed. I stood up and decided that tomorrow I would start figuring this out. Tonight, I just needed to find somewhere to sleep that didn't have raccoons or worse, living in it. The barn, despite its alarming tilt, was surprisingly more intact on the inside. The smell hit me first, old hay and dust and the ghosts of animals long gone. But the roof seemed solid enough in most places, and the floor was dirt-packed hard by decades of use. I found an old horse stall that was cleaner than the rest. I cleared out some debris, spread my sleeping bag on the ground, and lay down as darkness fell around me. I listened to mice scurrying in the walls. I listened to the wind whistling through gaps in the boards. I listened to sounds I'd never heard before. Owls hooting, coyotes calling in the distance. The complete absence of traffic and sirens and human noise. It should have been terrifying, but somehow it wasn't. For the first time in 3 years, I felt something other than grief and anger. I felt hope. Add to Silas and the first ray of light. The sun woke me. It came streaming through the gaps in the barn walls, golden and warm. Nothing like the fluorescent lights that had woken me every morning for 3 years. I lay there for a moment, disoriented, before I remembered where I was. My farm. I was on my farm. My body ached from sleeping on the ground. My back was stiff and my neck was sore, and I was fairly certain something had crawled across my face during the night. But I was awake, and I was free, and I owned land. I stepped outside the barn and into the morning. The property looked different in daylight, still overwhelming, still damaged, still requiring more work than one person could possibly do alone. But the morning sun softened everything, painting the overgrown fields in shades of green and gold. Dew sparkled on the weeds like scattered diamonds. I could hear birds singing, so many birds, more than I'd ever heard in my life. The air smelled like earth and growing things and possibility. I was standing there taking it all in when I heard a vehicle approaching. My whole body tensed. Old habits from 3 years of prison, where any unexpected approach could mean trouble. I positioned myself near the barn door, ready to retreat inside if necessary. A pickup truck came bouncing down the dirt road, trailing a cloud of dust. It was old and practical and spotted with rust. It stopped near the house, and an elderly man climbed out. He was in his 70s at least, with a weathered face that looked like it had spent a lifetime under open skies. He wore a faded flannel shirt and work boots that had seen better days. His white hair was thin, but his eyes were sharp. He saw me standing by the barn and stopped. For a long moment, we just looked at each other. I wondered what he saw. A young woman who clearly didn't belong here. A stranger on land that had been empty for over a decade. Then he smiled and his whole face transformed. So you're the one who bought this place? I nodded, not sure what to say. He walked toward me, moving slowly but steadily, like a man who'd learned to pace himself over many years of hard work. I'm Silas, he said. Silas Thorne. I farm the land just east of here. Been there 45 years now. My wife Martha sent me over with coffee and biscuits. She saw light from your direction last night and insisted I check on whoever was brave enough to take on this place. He extended his hand and I shook it. His grip was firm despite his age. I saw a light in the barn last night, he continued. First time in 13 years there's been any sign of life on this property. Figured I should make sure you hadn't gotten yourself into more trouble than you could handle. I bought it, I said, at auction. Silas nodded slowly, like this confirmed something he'd already suspected. The Brennan place. Harold was a good man, a good friend. He looked around at the overgrown fields, the damaged house, the leaning barn. Killed him to see what happened after he passed. His kids, well, they had their reasons for not wanting this place, but it was still hard to watch it fall apart. He turned back to me. You got a name. Reese Marlowe. Reese, he said, testing how it sounded. You got any experience with farming, Reese? I could have lied, but something about this old man made me want to tell the truth. No, sir. I don't know anything about farming. I don't know anything about fixing houses or barns either. I just knew I needed a fresh start, and this place was what I could afford. Silas looked at me for a long moment. I could see him taking my measure, trying to figure out what kind of person I was. You know what you're getting into here. This place needs years of work, and that's if everything goes right, which it never does. I know, I said, but I'm not afraid of hard work. Something shifted in his eyes. Respect maybe, or at least the beginning of it. Tell you what, he said. My wife packed enough food for 3 people because that's just how she is. Why don't you come sit on my tailgate and have some breakfast, and I'll tell you about Harold Brennan in this land. We sat on the back of his truck as the morning warmed around us. The coffee was strong and hot, and the biscuits were the best thing I'd eaten in months, maybe years. I hadn't realized how hungry I was until I started eating. Silas told me about Harold Brennan. Harold had been a farmer his whole life, 3rd generation on this land. His grandfather had cleared these fields with nothing but determination and muscle. His father had built the house and the barn. Harold had taken over in his 20s and never wanted to do anything else. He married a woman named Dorothy and they raised 4 children here, 2 girls and 2 boys. They worked the land together, grew their own food, raised cattle and chickens, lived a life that was hard, but good. Then Dorothy got sick, Alzheimer's, the cruelest kind of forgetting. She slipped away piece by piece, forgetting her children, forgetting Harold, forgetting everything that had made her who she was. The medical bills piled up. Harold sold off equipment, first then livestock, then parcels of land he'd planned to leave to his children. He watched his legacy slowly dismantled to pay for his wife's care. His children had all moved away by then. They'd built lives in cities, wanted nothing to do with the backbreaking work of farming. They visited when they could, which wasn't often enough. They had their own struggles, their own families, their own dreams that didn't include this place. Dorothy died in 2008. Harold followed her 2 years later, his heart giving out like it had just been waiting for permission to stop. His children sold his property as quickly as they could. They divided what little money there was 4 ways and tried to forget about the farm that had consumed their father's life. He would have hated seeing it like this, Silas said, looking at the overgrown fields. He put everything he had into this land. Everything. I didn't know what to say. I was thinking about Grandma Elodie, about how she'd poured her whole heart into raising me, about how I hadn't been there when she needed me most. Why are you telling me all this? I finally asked. Silas shrugged. Because if you're going to work this land, you should know whose footsteps you're walking in. Harold was a good man. This was a good farm once. Maybe it can be again if someone's willing to put in the work. He climbed down from the tailgate. I have to get back to my own chores. But Reese, he paused, looking at me with those sharp old eyes. If you need help, you ask. Farmers around here, we look out for each other. Harold would have wanted someone to look out for whoever came after him. He drove away, leaving me alone with my thoughts and a bellyful of coffee and biscuits. The tractor and the secret. I spent the rest of that day taking inventory of what I'd actually bought. The house would need months of work before it was livable. The roof leaked in at least 3 places. The plumbing was shot. The electrical wiring looked like a fire hazard. but the foundation was solid and the walls were straight. Good bones, as people say. This house had good bones. The barn was worse than the house in some ways, but also more immediately usable. The main section was sound enough to provide shelter. I could make this my base while I worked on everything else. The fields were overwhelming. 13 years of neglect had turned cultivated land into wilderness. It would take heavy equipment and countless hours to clear enough space to plant anything. And then there was the farm equipment scattered around the property. Most of it was beyond saving. A plow that had rusted into a solid mass. A hay rake missing half its teeth. Various pieces of machinery I couldn't even identify, slowly being consumed by vegetation. But behind the barn, almost completely hidden by a wall of blackberry bushes and vines, I saw something that made me stop. It was a tractor, an old John Deere, probably from the 1960s based on its shape. The green paint had faded to a pale ghost of itself. The tires were flat and cracked with age. But there was something about it that called to me. Maybe it was the way it sat there patient and forgotten, waiting for someone to remember it existed. Maybe it was how it reminded me of myself. I decided to clear away the brush around it, partly because I needed to do something productive with my hands, partly because I was curious if there was any chance it could ever run again. I worked all afternoon pulling away blackberry vines that had grown through the wheel wells, cutting back saplings that had sprouted around it, sweeping away years of accumulated leaves and debris. The sun was setting by the time I'd cleared enough to really see what I was working with. The tractor was in rough shape, but not as bad as I'd feared. The body was solid. The engine, when I lifted the hood, was intact. It would need work, a lot of work, but it wasn't beyond saving. That's when I noticed something odd. The tractor seat was slightly askew. It wasn't sitting flat the way it should. It looked like it had been moved at some point and not quite put back right. I climbed up onto the tractor, my boots crunching on the rusty metal. I tried to adjust the seat back into position. It wouldn't budge at first, rusted in place after all these years. But I kept working at it, jiggling and pulling until finally something gave way. The seat lifted up, and I realized it wasn't just a seat. It was a lid covering a storage compartment built into the body of the tractor. I'd never known tractors could have hidden compartments. Inside, wrapped in what had once been oilcloth but was now mostly disintegrated fabric, was a metal box. My hands were shaking as I lifted it out. The box was about the size of a large shoebox made of tin that had rusted around the edges but was still intact. It had weight to it. Something substantial was inside. There was no lock, just a simple latch that had rusted shut. I carried it carefully into the barn. The last light of day was fading fast, and I had to squint to see what I was doing. I found a screwdriver in my duffel bag and used it to work the latch free, prying carefully so I wouldn't damage whatever was inside. The latch popped open. I lifted the lid, and I had to sit down because my legs wouldn't hold me. Inside the box were bundles of cash, old bills wrapped in rubber bands that crumbled at my touch. Beneath the money were papers, documents, photographs, and beneath all of that was a leather journal, its pages yellowed with age but still readable. I counted the money. Then I counted it again. Then I counted it a third time because there had to be some mistake. $8,400. I sat in that barn as darkness fell around me, holding more money than I'd ever seen in my life, trying to understand what had just happened. Who had hidden this? Why? And what was I supposed to do about it? I opened the journal with trembling hands. The handwriting was shaky but legible. The first entry was dated April 15th, 1998. My name is Harold Brennan, and if you're reading this, I'm probably dead. Reading through the night. I read through the night. I couldn't stop, couldn't put the journal down even when my eyes burned and my back ached from sitting hunched over on the dirt floor of the barn. Harold Brennan's handwriting told me everything. His whole life compressed into ink and paper and honesty so raw, it felt like looking at someone's soul. He wrote about Dorothy, about watching her forget him piece by piece, about the day she looked at him across the breakfast table and asked who he was, about holding her hand in the nursing home while she stared through him like he was made of glass. March 12th, 2006. Dorothy asked for her mother today. Her mother's been dead 20 years. I didn't correct her. I just held her hand and said her mother would be here soon. She smiled at me like I was a kind stranger. I am a stranger to her now. The cruelest thing about this disease is that she's gone, but her body remains. I'm mourning someone who's still breathing. He wrote about the money, about how he'd saved it dollar by dollar, hiding it away because he didn't trust banks. Not after the savings and loan crisis had wiped out his parents' life savings in the 80s. This money is everything I have left after Dorothy's care. $8,400. It's not much, but it's meant for my children, for Claire and Davis and Lorelei and West. So they know I was thinking of them. So they know I didn't forget them even when they stopped coming around. He wrote about his children, about how proud he was of them, even though he'd never been good at saying it out loud, about how he understood why they left, even though it broke his heart. Claire called today. She got promoted to senior manager. I wanted to tell her I was proud. Instead, I asked about the weather in Chicago. Why am I like this? Why can't I say the words that matter? Davis sent photos of his kids, my grandchildren, beautiful children I barely know. He invited me to visit California. I said I'd think about it, but we both know I won't go. This land holds me like a chain. Lorelei published an article in some big magazine. I tried to read it, but the words were too complicated for an old farmer. I'm proud anyway. She's smart like her mother. I should tell her that. West is the quiet one. Like me. I worry about him most because I see myself in him. All that emotion locked up inside with no way to let it out. I hope he finds someone he can open up to. I hope he doesn't end up alone like I did. The entries got shorter as Harold got sicker. The handwriting shakier, the words more desperate. And then I found them, tucked between the pages of the journal. 247 letters, each one in a separate envelope, each one addressed to one of his 4 children, each one marked with a date, birthdays, Christmases, spanning 18 years. None of them had been sent. I opened one at random. It was addressed to Claire, dated Christmas 2003. My dearest Claire, it's Christmas and you're in Chicago with your new beau and your new life. I'm happy for you, I truly am. But the house feels empty without you. Your mother asked about you today. She doesn't remember your name anymore, but she remembers she has a daughter. She said, my girl with the dark hair. I showed her your photo and she smiled. I want you to know I'm proud of you. I know I pushed you too hard about staying on the farm. I was wrong. Your path is your own, and it's a good path. You're building something meaningful in that city. Don't ever doubt that. I'm sorry I couldn't say this to your face. I'm sorry I'm better with written words than spoken ones. Love, always, Dad. The letter had never been sent. It had sat in this box for 20 years, while Claire thought her father was disappointed in her. I opened another. This one to Wes, dated his 21st birthday. Wes, you're 21 today. A man now, though, you'll always be my youngest boy. I see so much of myself in you. The way you go quiet when you're hurting. The way you work with your hands instead of talking about your feelings. The way you look at this land like it's both a prison and a home. I want to tell you something I should have said years ago. You don't have to stay here. You don't have to follow in my footsteps. I know I made you feel like farming was the only honorable path, but that was my insecurity talking. My fear that everything I'd built would die with me. Go to Texas, take that job, build your own life, and know that I'll be proud of you no matter what you choose. Your father unsent. All of them unsent. I spread the letters out on the barn floor around me. 247 attempts at connection. 247 times Harold Brennan tried to reach across the distance and tell his children he loved them. 247 failures to follow through. The last entry in the journal was dated June 11th, 2010, 3 days before Harold died. The handwriting was almost illegible, the words wandering across the page like he'd been writing in the dark, or in terrible pain, or both. June 11, 2010. I'm running out of time. I can feel it in my chest. The doctor said it's angina, but I know what it really is. It's a heart that's been broken too many times trying to hold itself together. I need to tell the kids about the money. I need to give them the letters, but they don't visit anymore, and I don't blame them. I wasn't the father they needed. I was married to this land more than I was present for them. If someone finds this, if you're reading these words, please, find my children. Claire Brennan, Chicago, Illinois. Davis, Brennan, San Diego, California. Lorelei Brennan, New York, New York. Wes Brennan, Austin, Texas. Tell them I'm sorry. Tell them I love them more than this land. More than anything, I just didn't know how to show it. Tell them the money is theirs. Tell them the letters are theirs. Tell them their father's greatest regret isn't that they left. It's that he never found the words to tell them it was okay. If you can do this, if you can bring my family this small piece of peace, then maybe my life wasn't entirely wasted. Harold Brennan. I closed the journal as the first gray light of dawn crept through the barn walls. I hadn't slept all night. My eyes were burning. My body was exhausted, but my mind was racing. 3 days in hell. $8,400 could change my life. That thought followed me everywhere over the next 3 days. It whispered to me when I woke up cold and stiff on the barn floor. It screamed at me when my stomach growled because I was rationing canned beans. It haunted me when I looked at the house with its rotted porch and broken windows and knew I had no way to fix it. $8,400 could buy materials to fix the house, could buy tools and seeds and supplies, could mean the difference between this farm becoming something real or me failing and ending up back on the streets. But it wasn't mine. It belonged to Harold Brennan's children. Four people who'd sold this property for almost nothing because they had no idea their father had left them anything. Four people who probably spent the last 13 years believing their father had nothing to give them. Four people who might have spent all that time thinking he didn't love them. I spent 3 days wrestling with my decision, not because I was unsure about what was right, I knew what was right, but knowing and wanting aren't always the same thing. Day one, I counted the money again. I made lists. I calculated. With $8,000, I could hire someone to fix the well. I could buy a used generator. I could winterize the house before the cold came. I could survive. Day two, I was hungrier. I'd run out of canned beans. I walked the 5 miles into town and bought the absolute cheapest food I could find with the last $17 from my original 72. A loaf of bread, peanut butter, crackers. I rationed it like I was preparing for the apocalypse. That night it rained. The barn roof leaked in 3 places. I moved my sleeping bag twice trying to stay dry. I lay there shivering, listening to water drip onto the dirt floor, thinking about how $8,000 could fix this, could fix everything. Day three, I hit bottom. I opened the metal box and just stared at the money, picked up one of the bundles. The rubber band crumbled in my fingers and $20 bills scattered across my lap. Nobody would know. Harold was dead. His children didn't know this money existed. I'd bought this property legally. Anything I found on it was technically mine. Nobody would know, except me, and Grandma Elodie would know, wherever she was. I could hear her voice as clearly as if she were sitting next to me in that cold barn. Reese, girl, your character is what you do when nobody's watching. And right now, nobody's watching. So who are you going to be? I put the money back in the ball, I put the bus back in the tractor's compartment, and I made my decision. I would find Harold Brennan's children. I would return the money. Even if it meant losing my only chance at making this farm work. Even if it meant failing and ending up with nothing. Because if I built something on a foundation of stolen money, I would never be able to look at myself in the mirror without seeing exactly what those people who sent me to prison accused me of being. I would rather fail honestly than succeed as a thief. The search. The problem was I had no idea how to find them. The journal had first names and general locations, but no phone numbers, no addresses, nothing concrete. Claire in Chicago could be any of 10,000 people. Same with Davis in San Diego and Lorelei in New York. West in Austin was even more impossible. I walked back into town the next morning. My legs ached from the 10-mile round trip the day before, but I couldn't afford the gas to drive even if I had a car. The library in Cedarbrook was tiny. One room with shelves of worn books and 2 ancient computers. The librarian was a woman in her 60s named Mrs. Peaton with silver hair and reading glasses on a chain around her neck. I spent hours searching online, trying every combination of names and cities I could think of. Nothing worked. Facebook showed me hundreds of Claire Brennans. LinkedIn showed me dozens of Davis Brennans. None of them looked right. None of them had any connection to a farm in Washington. I was about to give up when Mrs. Peaton came over. You've been at that computer all day, honey. Is there something I can help you find? I hesitated. I'd learned not to trust people easily. 3 years of betrayal and disappointment had taught me that lesson well. But there was something kind in her eyes, something that reminded me of Grandma Elodie. I explained what I was trying to do, leaving out the part about the money. I said I'd found some personal items belonging to Harold Brennan that I wanted to return to his family. Her face lit up. Oh, I knew Harold. Lovely man. Terrible what happened to him and Dorothy. She thought for a moment. You know his daughter Claire used to work at the bank here in town before she moved away. I bet Doris over at the county records office would have forwarding addresses from when the property was sold. They would have had to notify all the heirs. It took another week of persistence, phone calls, navigating bureaucracy, but Mrs. Paton made calls on my behalf. She vouched for me to people who were suspicious of a stranger asking questions. She refused to give up even when I was ready to quit. Finally, we got a phone number for Claire Brennan in Chicago. I must have picked up the phone 20 times before I actually dialed. My heart was racing. I didn't know what to say or how to explain. When she answered, her voice was professional, Busy, the voice of someone who didn't have time for unexpected calls from strangers. This is Claire Brennan. I stumbled through my introduction. My mouth was dry. My hands were shaking. Ms. Brennan, my name is Reese Marlowe. You don't know me. I bought your father's old farm, the one in Cedar Brook, and I found something. Something I think you and your family should have. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. You're at Dad's farm. Her voice changed, became softer, younger somehow. Someone bought it. Yes, ma'am, about 3 weeks ago. And I was clearing out an old tractor, and I found some things that belonged to your father. Personal things, important things. What kind of things? I took a deep breath. Money. Your dad hid $8,400 in the tractor. And there's a journal. He wrote about all of you, about how much he loved you. And there are letters, 247 letters. I heard her sharp intake of breath. How much money? $8,400. And the letters he wrote them over 18 years. To you and your brothers and sister. He never sent them, but I think he wanted you to have them. The silence that followed was so long I thought she'd hung up. Then I heard her crying, soft sobs that she was trying to muffle. He left us money, she whispered, after everything, after all the bills and the debt. He managed to save money. Her voice broke completely. We thought there was nothing left. We thought he'd spent everything on Mom's care and his treatments. We thought the farm was just this burden he'd saddled us with. We sold it for barely anything because we thought she couldn't finish. I know, I said quietly, but he did think of you, all of you, every day for 18 years, and I think he'd want you to know that. We talked for an hour. Claire told me about her childhood on the farm, about early mornings helping her dad with chores, about fighting with him as a teenager because she wanted to leave and see the world, about the guilt she carried for not visiting more before he died. She gave me phone numbers for Davis, Lorelei, and West. Over the next 3 days, I called each of them. Davis in San Diego. He cried like a child when I told him about the letters. Dad was proud of me. He never said it. Not once. Lorelei in New York. She was angry at first. If this is some kind of scam. But when I read her one of the letters, her anger crumbled into grief. He called me his smart girl. I never knew. West in Austin. He was the hardest. His voice was flat, suspicious. Why would you do this? What do you want? I didn't have a good answer except the truth. Because it's the right thing to do. The family returns. 2 weeks later, all 4 of them came to the farm. It was the first time they'd been back since their father's funeral. The first time they'd been together in the same place in over 8 years. I watched from inside the barn as they pulled up in their rental cars. I watched them stand in the overgrown driveway, looking at the place that had defined their early lives now falling apart and being reclaimed by nature. Claire was tall and professional looking, wearing a business suit that seemed out of place in the rural setting. 46 years old with dark hair pulled back in a severe bun. She stood very straight like she was bracing herself. Davis was heavy-set with kind eyes and a nervous laugh. 44. He kept wiping his palms on his jeans. Lorelei had her father's face. I could tell from the photos in the journal. 41 on number 1. She was crying before she even got out of the car. Wes, the youngest at 33, just stood there silently, hands in his pockets, watching everything with an expression I couldn't read. I met them at the barn with the metal box, the journal, and the letters I'd organized by recipient. My hands were shaking as I handed Claire the box. This was hidden in the John Deere in a compartment under the seat. I counted it 3 times. It's $8,400. Claire opened the box with trembling hands. All 4 of them stared at the money like it was something from another world. Then Lorelei picked up the journal and started reading. Within minutes, all of them were crying. They passed the journal around, reading passages out loud to each other. Listen to this, Davis said, his voice thick with emotion. He read an entry from April 1997. Davis called today. He got the promotion at his company. I'm so proud of him, even though I never told him that enough. I was always pushing him to take over the farm. Never asked what he wanted. I see that now. He's building something good in California. Something that makes him happy. That should have been enough for me. Davis wiped his eyes. I never knew he felt that way. He was always so disappointed in me for leaving. Here's one about me, Claire said, her voice breaking. Claire is managing 50 people now. 50. My daughter, who used to be scared to speak in front of her class. She's running meetings with executives, making decisions that affect hundreds of lives. I wish I could tell her I'm proud, but when she calls, I just ask about the weather. They spent hours there reading the journal, sharing memories, laughing and crying together, slowly rebuilding connections that had frayed over years of distance and unspoken hurts. I tried to give them privacy. I walked out to look at the tractor to give them space for their grief and their healing. But Wes found me. I was sitting on the porch steps when he walked over. He didn't say anything at first, just stood there with his hands in his pockets looking at the overgrown fields. "Can I ask you something?" His voice was flat. "Careful." I stopped what I was doing and turned to face him. "Sure." He crossed his arms over his chest. His jaw was tight. "Why did you really do this? Find us. Give back the money." I didn't understand the question at first. "Because it wasn't mine. It belonged to your family." He shook his head slowly. "Nobody does that. Nobody finds $8,000 and just gives it away. Not when they're living in a barn eating canned beans." His eyes were hard now, searching my face for the lie he was sure was there. I've seen too many people take advantage of situations like this. People who pretend to be good until they get what they want. So I'm asking you straight, what's your angle? What do you want from us? The accusation hit me like a punch to the stomach. For a moment, I was back in that courtroom, listening to people who didn't know me decide who I was, being judged for something I didn't do. I could have gotten angry. I could have told him to leave. Instead, I told him the truth. I told him about the reform school, about being set up by people I trusted, about 3 years in a place that tried to break me, about my grandmother dying while I was locked away, unable to say goodbye. I told him about walking out of those gates with $72 and nothing else, about finding this farm, about the hope I felt when I saw those overgrown fields, about sleeping in this barn and crying myself to sleep that first night. And I told him about finding the money. If I kept it, Amri, I said, my voice rough, I would become exactly what they accused me of being, a thief. I couldn't do that, not to myself, not to my grandmother's memory. My voice cracked. She raised me to do the right thing, even when nobody's watching. If I betrayed that, I'd lose the only thing I have left of her. West was silent for a long moment. Then something in his face shifted. The hardness faded. What replaced it looked almost like shame. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I had to know." He turned and walked back to his siblings without another word. But something had changed between us. I could feel it. The letters. When the 4 siblings gathered together again that evening, they had the money counted and separated into 4 piles, $2,100 each. Claire picked up one of the piles and held it out to me. "This is yours." I started to protest, but she cut me off. "Reese, you could have kept all of this. You bought this property legally. Anything you found on it was legally yours. You didn't have to find us. You didn't have to give us our father's journal, which honestly means more than the money." She pressed the bills into my hands. "You did the right thing when it would have been so easy to do the wrong thing. Dad would have respected that. Dad would have liked you." I looked at West. He nodded once. A small gesture, but it meant everything. I took the money, $2,100, more money than I'd ever held in my life. "Thank you," I whispered. That night they stayed, all 4 of them. We cleared out a room in the house, the only one with a roof that didn't leak, and they brought in air mattresses from their cars. We sat around a camping lantern, and they took turns reading the letters their father had written. Claire read first. A letter from Christmas, 2005. "My dearest Claire, I'm writing this by the fire on Christmas Eve. You're not here. You haven't been here for Christmas in 3 years. But I understand you have your own life now, your own traditions. I just wanted you to know that I still set a place for you at the table. Just in case, I always will." Her hands shook as she folded the letter carefully and set it aside. Davis read next, a letter from his 30th birthday. "Son, you're 30 today, the same age I was when I took over this farm from my father. I spent years thinking you'd do the same, but you chose a different path, and I'm learning to understand that was the right choice. You're happier in California than you ever would have been here. That's all I ever wanted for you, even if I had a terrible way of showing it." Lorelai couldn't read hers out loud. She tried, but her voice broke after the first line. Wes took the letter gently from her hands and read it for her. "Lorelai, my sensitive girl, you feel everything so deeply. I see so much of your mother in you. The way you cry at sad movies, the way you bring home stray animals, the way you love with your whole heart even when it hurts. Don't ever lose that. The world needs people who feel things the way you do." Then it was West's turn. He picked up a letter dated his 25th birthday. His hands were steady, but his voice wasn't. "West, you're the quiet one, like me. That's what worries me most. I see how you keep everything locked inside. All that hurt and anger and fear with no way to let it out. I was the same way. I'm still the same way. And it's cost me everything that mattered. Don't be like me, son. Find someone you can talk to. Find someone who can reach past all those walls. Promise me you won't end up alone the way I did. Wes set the letter down carefully. He didn't cry, but his jaw was clenched so tight I could see the muscle jumping. They read letters until midnight, 247 attempts at connection. 247 times their father had tried to bridge the distance between them. 247 times he'd failed to press send. But sitting there in that half-ruined house, watching these four broken people piece themselves back together through their father's words, I realized something. Harold Brennan hadn't failed. He'd just been waiting for the right messenger. They stay. I expected them to leave the next morning, to take their money and their letters and return to their separate lives in their separate cities. But when the sun came up, Davis was already outside examining the barn. "This isn't as bad as it looks," he said when he saw me. "The foundation is solid. The main support beams are good. We just need to shore up the sides and replace about 30% of the roof boards." I asked. He smiled. "I work in construction during college, before I got my business degree and forgot how to use my hands. I've got 2 weeks of vacation saved up. Might as well use it for something that matters." Claire made coffee on a camping stove she'd brought. Real coffee, not the instant stuff I'd been surviving on. The smell alone was enough to make me want to cream one. "I can't stay as long as Davis," she said, handing me a mug, "but I can stay through the weekend. And I'm good with numbers. Let me look at your finances. Help you make a plan for how to make this place sustainable." Lorelei and her husband Bennett, a quiet man with gentle eyes who'd driven up from Seattle to meet her, walked the property together. When they came back, Bennett was making notes. "I'm an electrician," he said. "This place has been without power for 13 years. The wiring is shot, but it's not impossible to fix. I can come back next weekend with my tools. Get you at least basic power to the house." Wes didn't say anything that morning. He just started working. He found tools in the barn, rusty but usable, and began clearing brush from around the house. By noon, he'd made more progress than I'd managed in 3 weeks. That evening, as the sun set behind the mountains, we all sat on the porch together. The boards still groaned under our weight, but Davis had already started marking which ones needed to be replaced. "Dad would have loved this," Lorelei said softly. She was looking out at the fields, glowing golden in the fading light. "All of us here together, working the land. He would have loved that someone's trying to bring this place back," Claire corrected. She looked at me. "Someone who sees what he saw. Someone who's not afraid of hard work." West finally spoke. "I'm not going back to Austin." Everyone turned to look at it. "My job there, it's fine. It pays the bills. But I hate it. I've hated it for 6 years. And I kept thinking about this place, about how Dad needed help and none of us were here, about how I should have come back." He looked at me. "I can't change the past, but maybe I can do something useful now. If you'll let me stay. Help you get this farm running again." I didn't know what to say. A week ago, I'd been completely alone. Now I had 4 people offering to help me build something I didn't even know how to build. "I don't have money to pay you," I said. Wes shrugged. "Split the profits when there are profits. Until then, I've got some savings and room and board." He gestured at the half-ruined house. "Such as it is." Davis laughed. It was a good sound, easy and genuine. "If Wes staying, he's going to need a room that doesn't leak. I'm definitely extending my 2 weeks." Jaya. The video. That night, Wes couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about the letters, about his father's voice trapped in ink and paper. Around midnight, he went back to his father's bedroom. Started going through the closet more carefully, looking for anything else Harold might have left behind. That's when he found it, hidden behind a stack of old farming magazines. A VHS tape, labeled in his father's handwriting, "For my children. Play this after I'm gone." Wes's hands shook as he carried it downstairs. We didn't have a VCR, but Silas did. He'd mentioned it once, kept it to watch old John Wayne movies. We drove to Silas's house at 1 in the morning. He didn't complain, just set up the player and left us alone in his living room. Wes pressed play. Harold appeared on screen, sitting in the farmhouse kitchen. The camera was shaky. He'd probably set it up himself on a tripod. His face was gaunt, sick. This was filmed in his final days. "Claire Davis, Lorelei West." Harold's voice came through the old speakers. Rough, tired, but unmistakably him. "If you're watching this, I'm gone, and I need to say some things I never said when I was alive." Wes grabbed my hand. Squeezed so hard it hurt. I squeezed back. I wasn't a good father. I know that. I loved this land more than I loved being present for you. I missed your games, your recitals, your graduations because something needed fixing on the farm. I thought that was what being a man meant. Providing, working. I was wrong. Harold's voice broke. He looked down at his hands. Claire, you're the strongest person I know. You got that from your mother. I'm so proud of the life you built. Davis, you have a kindness I never had. You're a better father than I ever was. Lorelei, you see beauty in everything. Don't ever let the world make you cynical. And West, he looked directly at the camera, directly at his son. West, you're so much like me, it scares me. You keep everything inside. You think feeling things makes you weak. It doesn't. It makes you human. Please don't make my mistakes. Let people in. Let yourself be loved. Harold wiped his eyes. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I'm just asking you to know that I loved you. Every single day. I just didn't know how to show it. And that's my failure, not yours. You were enough. You were always enough. I just couldn't see past my own stubbornness to tell you. The video continued for another 5 minutes. Harold talking about memories, about Dorothy, about regrets, about hope that someday his children would understand. The last thing he said, if someone brings you this tape, thank them. Thank them for caring enough about a family they don't know to do the right thing. That kind of person is rare. Hold on to them. The screen went black. West was sobbing, full-body sobs that shook him. I held him while he cried for the father he'd lost, for the words he'd needed to hear, for the forgiveness that came too late and right on time. He said he was proud of me, West whispered against my shoulder. He actually said it. He meant it, I said, every word. We sat there in Silas's living room until dawn, not talking, just being. Two people who'd lost family finding something like it in each other. When we drove back to the farm as the sun rose, West said, I meant what I said yesterday, about staying, about helping you make this work. I know, but there's something else. He kept his eyes on the road. My dad said to hold on to people who do the right thing when nobody's watching. So I'm holding on, if you'll let me. I looked at him, really looked at him, at the determination in his jaw, at the vulnerability in his eyes, at the man who was trying so hard not to be his father's mistakes. I'll let you, I said. He smiled. It was the first real smile I'd seen from him. Good, because I'm not going anywhere. Cliffhanger and transition. The next 2 weeks were a blur of activity. Davis stayed his promise 2 weeks. By the time he left, the barn was sound again. The porch was rebuilt. The well was pumping clear water. He'd lost 15 pounds and gained a tan and looked happier than his siblings said they'd seen him in years. I might come back in the spring, he said, if you need help with planting. I'll need help, I promised. Lorelei and Bennett came back the following weekend as promised. They spent 2 full days rewiring the house. When they were done, we had electricity for the first time in 13 years. I flipped the switch and lights came on. Actual lights. I stood in the kitchen crying while Lorelei hugged me. Claire had to return to Chicago after the first weekend, but she'd spent those days creating a business plan. Spreadsheets, projections, a roadmap for making this farm financially viable. I'm investing $20,000, she said before she left. Call it a business loan, 0% interest. Pay me back when you can. Claire, I can't. You can and you will, because my father would have wanted this place to succeed, and because you've given my family something worth more than money. But it was West who stayed. He moved into the house permanently, claimed the smallest bedroom, the only other room besides mine that Bennett had managed to wire. He bought a used truck from a farmer 3 towns over. He started talking to Silas about crop rotation and soil management and all the things he'd learned growing up on this land before he'd tried to forget them. We worked from sunup to sundown, clearing fields, fixing equipment, learning alongside each other because neither of us really knew what we were doing, but both of us were too stubborn to quit. We developed a rhythm, a partnership. He was better with machinery. I was better with planning. He knew the land. I knew how to problem solve when things went wrong, which was constantly. But one evening about 6 weeks after I'd first found the money, something changed. I was in the barn checking on the tractor when I heard a vehicle coming up the drive. Not Silas's familiar pickup. Not a rental car from one of West's siblings. This was something else. Something expensive and deliberate. I walked outside to see a black BMW pulling up to the house. A man in an expensive suit got out. Mid-40s, slicked back hair, predatory smile. West emerged from the house, tension written in every line of his body. "Can we help you?" I asked. The man's smile widened. "I certainly hope so. My name is Marcus Ashford. I represent Cascade Development Corporation, and I'm here to make you an offer you'd be foolish to refuse." The threat emerges. Marcus Ashford looked around the property with barely concealed disdain. At the half-repaired barn, at the overgrown fields, at me covered in grease and dirt from working on the tractor. "Ms. Marlowe, is it?" His voice was smooth, professional, the kind of voice trained to sound friendly while hiding something sharp underneath. "Yes." He walked toward me with his hand extended. I didn't take it. My hands were too dirty anyway. He dropped his hand without missing a beat. "I'll get straight to the point. Cascade Development has been acquiring properties in this area for a large-scale development project. Resort homes, high-end retail, the kind of thing that could really bring some economic vitality to a dying town like Cedarbrook. We're not interested in selling," I said. His smile didn't waver, but something flickered in his eyes. Irritation, maybe, or calculation. "I understand you feel an attachment to this place, but you haven't heard my offer yet. We're prepared to pay $75,000 for this property. That's well above market value for 47 acres of undeveloped land, especially land in this condition. $75,000. The number echoed in my head. That was life-changing money for someone like me. That was enough to start over somewhere else, somewhere easier. But I thought about Harold Brennan, about how he'd refused to sell even when he was desperate, about how this land had meant something to him beyond money. I said, "We're not interested." West had moved to stand beside me. Davis and Claire had heard the commotion and emerged from the house. They stood behind me like sentinels. Ashford's smile finally slipped. "Just a fraction. Ms. Marlowe, I don't think you understand the situation. This area is being redeveloped whether you participate or not. We've already acquired 6 other properties. Yours is right in the middle of our planned community. It would be much easier for everyone if you just took the money and moved on." "Much easier for you, maybe," Wes said. His voice was cold. "But we're not interested in easy." Ashford turned his attention to West. "And you are Wes Brennan. My father owned this land for 40 years before he died. My family is buried in the cemetery 2 miles from here. So when I say we're not selling, I mean it." Something changed in Ashford's expression. The professional veneer cracked slightly. "Mr. Brennan, I'm aware of your family's history with this property. I'm also aware that you and your siblings chose to sell it for a fraction of what it was worth. So forgive me if I find your sudden attachment to it somewhat convenient." "Get off our land," Claire said, her voice cut like a blade. "Now." Ashford looked at each of us in turn. His smile was completely gone now. "You should think very carefully about this decision. Cascade Development has significant resources and significant influence in this county. It would be unfortunate if things became difficult for you." "Is that a threat?" Davis asked. He was still holding a hammer from the work he'd been doing. His knuckles were white around the handle. "It's a reality check." Ashford pulled a business card from his pocket and set it on the porch railing. "You have 48 hours to reconsider. After that, we'll proceed with our plans regardless of your cooperation. And I can promise you won't like how that feels." He walked back to his BMW, got in, drove away trailing dust and menace in equal measure. We stood in silence for a long moment after he left. That, West finally said, was not good. West will the town chooses sides. That evening Silas came by. Not for a friendly visit this time. His face was grim. "You met Marcus Ashford." It wasn't a question. "How did you know?" I asked. "Because he's been doing the same thing to every farmer in a 20-mile radius. Making offers, making threats." Silas sat down heavily on the porch steps. Suddenly he looked every one of his 72 years. 3 families have sold already. The Hendersons, the Martins, the O'Connells. They didn't want to, but Ashford made things difficult. Equipment vandalized, livestock poisoned, insurance mysteriously canceled. "Jesus," Claire whispered. "He can't get away with that," Davis said. "That's criminal harassment, extortion." "Prove it." Silas looked up at us. "Cascade Development has lawyers, good ones. They know how to keep their hands clean. And they've got connections in the county government, sheriff's department, even some state officials." "There has to be something we can do," Lorelei said. She and Bennett had returned that morning for another weekend of work. Silas nodded slowly. "There is. You stand your ground. You refuse to be intimidated. And you make sure people in this town know what's happening." "Will they care?" I asked. I'm nobody here. I've been in Cedarbrook for less than 2 months. You're not nobody. Ruby's voice came from behind us. She'd walked up so quietly I hadn't heard her approach. She was carrying a covered dish that smelled like heaven. Pot roast, I realized, with vegetables and potatoes. Reese Marlowe, you returned money that wasn't yours to the Brennan family. You brought these 4 people back together after years apart. You're working harder than anyone I've seen in a decade to bring this farm back to life. In a small town that matters. She set the dish on the porch. Eat. You're all too skinny. And know that when Cascade comes back, and they will come back, there are people in this town who'll stand with you. Over the next week, I learned she was right. Mrs. Peaton from the library brought me a box of books on farming. You'll need these, she said simply. The owner of the hardware store, a gruff man named Tom, refused to let me pay for supplies. You're doing good work here. Harold would have wanted you to have the tools to do it right. Even Sheriff Dawkins stopped by. He was a big man with a weathered face and tired eyes who looked like he'd seen too much. I hear Cascade Development made you an offer, he said. They did. We refused. He nodded. Good. I've been watching them for 2 years now. They're dirty. I know it. I just can't prove it yet. Yet, West asked. I'm working on it. Keep records of everything. Any threats, any vandalism, any harassment. Document it all. Eventually they'll slip up. And when they do, I'll be waiting. But not everyone in town was supportive. Gerald Mitchell, the bank manager, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses, made it clear he thought we were making a mistake. That Brennan farm has been a drain on this community for over a decade, he said, when I came in to open an account with my share of Harold's money. Cascade Development could bring real money here. Jobs, tax revenue, you're being selfish. Or maybe she's being principled, Claire said coldly. She'd come with me to help navigate the banking bureaucracy. There's a difference. The vandalism started 3 days after Ashford's visit. Someone spray-painted, "Get out" on the fence post at the end of the driveway. West and I spent a morning painting over it. 2 days later, someone scattered nails on the dirt road leading to the property. Davis drove over them in his rental car, all 4 tires shredded. The morning after that, we found the fence cut in 3 places. Silas's cattle had wandered onto our property. We spent hours rounding them up and repairing the fence. They're trying to make us give up, I said that night. We were all exhausted, frustrated, scared, though none of us wanted to admit it. They're going to fail, Wes said. His jaw was set. We didn't come this far to give up now. The plan and the arrest. Claire had to return to Chicago for work the next day. Before she left, she sat me down at the plywood table. I've been crunching numbers, she said. If we can get 15 acres cleared and planted by spring, you can turn a small profit on vegetables alone. Add in a farm stand, maybe a CSA program, and you're looking at sustainable income within 2 years. She slid a spreadsheet across to me. I'm investing $20,000. Call it a business loan. 0% interest. Pay me back when you can. Claire, I can't. You can and you will, because my father would have wanted this place to succeed, and because you've given my family something worth more than money. Lorelei and Bennett came back the following weekend as promised. They spent 2 full days rewiring the house. When they were done, we had electricity for the first time in 13 years. I flipped the switch and lights came on. Actual lights. I stood in the kitchen crying while Lorelei hugged me. Davis had to leave after 3 weeks total. By the time he left, the barn was sound again. The porch was rebuilt. The well was pumping clear water. He'd lost 15 pounds and gained a tan and looked happier than his siblings said they'd seen him in years. I'll come back in the spring, he said, for planting. I'm counting on it, I promised. But Wes stayed. He didn't talk about it anymore. It was simply understood. This was his home now, our home. We worked from sunup to sundown, clearing fields, fixing equipment, learning how to farm by trial and error, and advice from Silas. And one evening, about 8 weeks after I'd first found the money, Sheriff Dawkins came back. This time he wasn't alone. 2 deputy vehicles followed him up the drive. Is everything okay? West asked as we walked out to meet them. Dawkins smiled. It was the first time I'd seen him smile. Better than okay. Get your coats. You're going to want to see this. We followed the sheriff's convoy into town. They led us to the county courthouse. Outside, 2 more patrol cars were parked, and being led out in handcuffs was Marcus Ashford. Behind him, also in handcuffs, was a woman in an expensive suit, and 3 other men who looked like they'd been caught mid-meeting. What's happening? I asked. Sheriff Dawkins walked over to us. Gerald Mitchell, the bank manager, came forward 3 days ago. Turns out he'd been documenting Cascade's illegal activities for months. Bribery, extortion, conspiracy to commit arson. He had recordings, financial records, everything. Gerald, I was shocked, but he was on their side. He was pretending to be on their side, Dawkins corrected. He came to me 6 months ago, said Cascade had approached him about helping pressure local farmers. He's been working undercover ever since gathering evidence. He nodded toward Ashford being loaded into a patrol car. Marcus Ashford is going away for a long time. So is Patricia Morgan, their attorney, and the CEO of Cascade Development is being arrested in Seattle as we speak. Wes grabbed my hand, squeezed it tight. It's over, I asked. It's over. They won't bother you anymore. They won't bother anyone anymore. That night, the whole town came to celebrate. Ruby brought enough food to feed an army. Silas and Martha showed up with 3 other farming families. Mrs. Peaton brought wine. Tom from the hardware store brought beer. Even Gerald showed up looking relieved and exhausted. I'm sorry I made you think I was against you, he said to me. I had to maintain my cover, but I want you to know what you're doing here matters. You gave Harold's family their father back, and you're making this community stronger. We ate on the porch and in the yard as the sun set. People told stories about Harold Brennan, about the kind of man he'd been, about how proud he'd be to see his land coming back to life. Claire Davis and Lorelei drove up from Seattle together. They'd coordinated the trip to be here for the celebration. To Dad, Claire said, raising her glass, who taught us that land isn't just property, it's legacy. To Reese, Davis added, who proved that doing the right thing still matters. To family, Lorelei said quietly, blood or chosen, it doesn't matter which. We drank to all of it, to Harold, to second chances, to stubborn determination, to communities that look out for each other, to home. What? 3 years later, the farm changed everything. That first spring, West and I planted 15 acres. Tomatoes, squash beans, lettuce, peppers. We had no idea what we were doing. We made every mistake possible, but Silas helped. Ruby spread word, and when our first harvest came in, people bought it. Not because it was perfect, it wasn't. The tomatoes were sometimes misshapen. The squash had bug damage. The lettuce bolted early because we planted it too late. But people bought it because it was local, because it was grown by people who cared, because supporting us meant standing up to the kind of corporate bullying that had threatened their own farms for years. By the second year, we had a farm stand at the end of the driveway. Open Saturday mornings, it was packed every week. By the third year, we'd expanded to 40 acres. We had 2 employees, local teenagers who needed summer work. We'd started a small CSA program with 20-member families. We'd bought 3 more tractors, all used, all restored, including the John Deere where I'd found Harold's box. West and I had spent 6 months bringing it back to life. New tires, rebuilt engine, fresh paint in that classic green. It sat in the barn as a reminder of where everything started. The house was fully restored now, new roof, new windows, new plumbing and electrical. Davis had come back 3 times to help with major projects. Claire had visited twice, staying a week each time and keeping our books organized. Lorelei and Bennett had bought a small cabin on a lake 15 miles away. They came every weekend. Bennett did equipment repairs. Lorelei helped with marketing and social media. The Brennan siblings had their own lives in their own cities. But they came back regularly because this place wasn't just a farm anymore. It was a touchstone, a connection to their father, a reminder that family wasn't about perfection, it was about showing up when it mattered. Wes never left. He lived in the house full-time now. We'd divided responsibilities. He handled the growing and harvest, I handled business and logistics. We made a good team. But somewhere along the way, it had become more than a business partnership. It happened slowly. So slowly I almost didn't notice. The way he'd bring me coffee in the mornings without me asking. The way I'd find myself looking for him when he wasn't around. The way we'd end up on the porch most evenings talking until the stars came out. The way my heart beat faster when he smiled at me. One evening in late summer of that third year, we were working in the barn, maintenance on the tractors. It was hot. We were both covered in grease and dirt and sweat. I was under the John Deere checking the oil pan when Wes said, "Reese, yeah, I need to tell you something." Something in his voice made me slide out from under the tractor. I sat up, wiping my hands on a rag. He was standing there holding a wrench, looking more nervous than I'd ever seen him. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. Everything's right, actually. That's the problem." I waited. I've been thinking about what my dad wrote in those letters, about not waiting, about saying the things that matter while you still can. My heart started hammering. "And there's something I need to say to you, Something I should have said months ago, but I was afraid I'd mess us up. He set down the wrench, took a step closer. I love you, Reese. I'm in love with you. I think I have been since the day you handed my family that box and asked for nothing in return. Since you showed me what integrity actually looks like. Since you proved that good people still exist in the world. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think, could only stare at him. I know you might not feel the same way, he continued. I know this could make things weird between us, but I can't keep pretending I don't feel this way. So I'm saying it. I love you. And if there's any chance you might feel the same. I kissed him. I don't know who moved first. Maybe both of us. But suddenly I was in his arms and his mouth was on mine and everything else disappeared. When we finally pulled apart, both of us were breathing hard. Is that a yes? He asked. That's a yes. He kissed me again, deeper this time, longer. His hands in my hair, my hands on his chest, feeling his heart racing as fast as mine. When we broke apart the second time, he was grinning. I should probably do this right. He dropped to one knee right there in the barn, in the dirt, both of us covered in grease. Reese Marlowe, will you marry me? I started crying. Happy tears this time. Yes, yes, absolutely yes. He stood up and swung me around. We were both laughing, both crying, both covered in dirt, and neither of us cared. We got married 3 months later. Not a big wedding, we didn't want that. Just family and the people who'd become family. Claire, Davis, Lorelei and their families. Silas and Martha, Ruby and Mrs. Peaton, Sheriff Dawkins, Tom from the hardware store, Gerald Mitchell, a dozen other people from town who'd supported us through everything. We held the ceremony in the South Field, the one West and I had cleared together that first autumn. It was late October, the leaves were changing, the sky was that particular shade of blue you only get in fall. I wore a simple white dress I'd bought from a boutique in Seattle. West wore a suit his brother had helped him pick out. We stood under an arch made of branches and late-season sunflowers. Ruby officiated. She had an online ordination from some internet church and took the responsibility very seriously. Do you, Wes Brennan, take Reese to be your lawfully wedded wife? I do. His voice was steady. His eyes were wet. And do you, Reese Marlowe, take Wes to be your lawfully wedded husband? I do. Then by the power vested in me by the internet and the state of Washington, I now pronounce you married. Kiss already. We did, and everyone cheered. The cemetery. The day after the wedding, West and I drove to the cemetery. It was a small plot 2 miles outside town. Cedar Brook Memorial. Mostly farming families. People who'd worked this land for generations. We found Harold's grave easily. It was next to Dorothy's. Simple headstones. Nothing fancy. Harold James Brennan, 1935-2010. Beloved father, Dorothy. May Brennan, 1937-2008. Beloved mother and wife. I set flowers on both graves. Wildflowers from the farm. The kind that grew along the fence line without any help from us. Wes just stood there with his hands in his pockets, looking at his parents' names carved in stone. Hey, Dad, he said quietly. Sorry it took me so long to visit. I was angry for a lot of years. Angry that you died. Angry that you let the land fall apart. Angry that you never just told us how you felt. He paused. But I read your letters. All of them. And I watched your video. And I understand now. You did love us. You just didn't know how to say it. His voice cracked. I wish you could have met Reese. I wish you could see what she's done with the farm. What we've built together. You would have liked her. She's stubborn like you. Works harder than anyone I've ever met. And she sees this land the way you did. Like it's something sacred. I put my hand in his. Squeezed. I'm staying, Dad. I'm not leaving anymore. I'm going to take care of this place. Make it thrive again. Make you proud. We stood there for a long time. The wind rustled through the trees. A crow called in the distance. Then I pulled out the leather journal from my bag. Harold's journal, the one I'd found in the tractor 3 years ago. I opened it to the last page. The page after Harold's final entry. The blank page. I'd brought a pen. I wrote, Dear Harold, my name is Reese Marlowe Brennan. I bought your farm 3 years ago with $100 and a prayer. I found the money you left. I found your journal. I found your letters. And I returned them all to your children. You should know they've forgiven you for the things you did and didn't say, for the time you didn't spend together. They understand now. They read every word you wrote, and they watched your video, and they know you love them. Your son, West, is my husband now. We're running the farm together. 40 acres in production. More planned for next year. The John Deere you hid the money in is restored and running. We use it every day. Claire and Davis and Lorelei come back regularly. They bring their families. Your grandchildren play in the fields you once worked. Your legacy isn't gone. It's just taken a different shape. My grandmother once told me that character is what you do when nobody's watching. You prove that. You saved that money when no one would have blamed you for spending it. You wrote those letters even though you never sent them. You loved your children even when you couldn't find the words. Thank you for teaching me what matters. Not land or money, but love and integrity and doing right even when it's hard. I promise to take care of this place, to honor what you built, to pass it forward to the next generation better than I found it. I paused, looked at West. He nodded. I added one more line, and I promise to tell your grandchild when they arrive in 7 months about the man you really were. West's eyes widened. Reese, are you saying I took a test this morning? It was positive. For a moment, he just stood there, processing. Then he picked me up and spun me around right there in the cemetery. We're having a baby. We're having a baby. He set me down gently, reverently, put his hand on my still flat stomach. Hey, Dad, he said, looking at Harold's gravestone. You're going to be a grandfather, again, and this time we'll tell them about you, every day. We'll make sure they know the man you really were. I finished the entry in the journal. Rest easy, your family is whole again and growing. With gratitude and respect, Reese, I closed the journal and tucked it back in my bag. We'd keep it, so our child could read it someday, so they'd know where they came from. We should go, Wes said. Everyone's probably wondering where we are. In a minute. I stood there looking at the 2 graves, at the names of people I'd never met but who'd changed my life anyway. Thank you, I whispered, for the farm, for the letters, for West, for showing me that home isn't where you're born, it's where you choose to plant roots. West put his arm around me. Ready, ready, full circle. We walked back to the truck hand in hand. The sun was setting behind us, casting long shadows across the cemetery. As we drove back toward the farm, I thought about the journey that had brought me here. From those iron gates with $72 and nothing else, to a homeless shelter in Portland, to a desperate auction bid, to a barn where I cried myself to sleep, to a tractor hiding a secret, to a choice between easy and right, to a family I found by accident and kept by choice, to a man who taught me that love doesn't have to be perfect to be real, to a home I'd built from ruins and determination, to a child who would grow up knowing they were wanted, knowing they belonged, knowing that family wasn't about blood, it was about showing up. When we pulled up the driveway, the house was lit up like a beacon. Claire and her family were still there for the weekend. Davis and his kids, Lorelei and Bennett. They'd promised to cook dinner for us. A post-wedding celebration. We could see them through the windows, laughing, moving around the kitchen, being family. Wes parked the truck and turned to me. You know what's crazy? 3 years ago, I was miserable in Austin, going through the motions of a life I didn't want. And now, I prompted, now I can't imagine being anywhere else, doing anything else, being with anyone else. He leaned over and kissed me, soft and sweet and full of promise. Welcome home, Mrs. Brennan. I smiled against his lips. I've been home for a while now. I was just waiting for you to catch up. We got out of the truck and walked toward the house together, toward the lights and the laughter and the family waiting inside. Behind us, the farm stretched out in the gathering darkness. 47 acres that had been forgotten and found again. Land that had broken one man's heart and healed 2 others. Land that had taught me the most important lesson of my life. Home isn't a place you find, it's a place you make. With your hands and your heart and your stubborn refusal to give up when things get hard. I'd started with $72 and a dream that seemed impossible. And I'd ended with everything that mattered. The iron gates of Riverside seemed like another lifetime now. Another person's story. This was my story. Mine and West's. Mine and the Brennan family's. Mine in this land's. Inside the house, someone called my name. Claire's voice. Reese, West, dinner's ready. We walked up the porch steps, the steps I'd cried on that first night. The steps Davis had rebuilt. The steps where West had told me he loved me. West held the door open. After you, Mrs. Brennan. I stepped inside, into the warmth and light and laughter. Through the window, I could see the tooth field, the one West and I had cleared together 3 years ago. Tomorrow, we'd plant the spring crops. Tomatoes and squash and beans, the cycle continuing. And in 7 months, there'd be a baby. a new generation, someone who'd never know what it felt like to be unwanted, someone who'd grow up surrounded by family blood and chosen both, someone who'd learn that home isn't where you're born, it's where you choose to plant roots and refuse to let go. I put my hand on my stomach, on the tiny life growing there. "Welcome home," I whispered. "You're going to love it here." And as the door closed behind us, I heard Grandma Elodie's voice one last time. Not in my head this time, deeper, in my heart. "I'm proud of you, Reese girl, so proud." "I know, Grandma," I whispered. "I'm finally proud of me too." Outside, the farm stretched into the darkness. 47 acres that had saved my life by letting me save it first. And somewhere I like to think Grandma Elodie and Harold Brennan were watching, smiling at what we'd built from ruins and stubbornness and love. The gates of Riverside were a lifetime ago. This right here, right now, this was forever.